In the small coastal town of Havenridge, the Brooks family was the kind of family people admired from a distance. They lived in a grand house, perched on a hill that overlooked the sea. The house itself, with its wraparound porch and sprawling garden, seemed to tell the story of success, of a life well lived. And for the most part, that's exactly what it was. Or so everyone thought. John Brooks was the family's foundation, a man of discipline and ambition. He wasn't just an architect, he was the architect. Everyone in Havenridge had either hired him or admired his work. His buildings stood as symbols of stability and strength. His reputation, untarnished, made him a local celebrity, a man people respected and envied. He moved through life with quiet confidence, a man who believed his family had no cracks. Then there was his wife, Marie Brooks. She had once been an artist, full of light and creativity before settling into her role as a homemaker. Her art was still a part of her, though, reflected in the way she carried herself, in the way she cared for her children. Marie was kind, always had time for anyone who needed a word of comfort or advice. The people of Havenridge adored her. She was the glue that kept the Brooks household together. Their two children, Lucas and Sophia, were the envy of every parent in town. Lucas was the kind of young man who had everything going for him. 21 years old, athletic, intelligent, destined for greatness. He was already making strides toward a career in law, following in his father's footsteps of success. Wherever Lucas went, admiration followed. And Sophia, just 19, was no less remarkable. She had an artistic spirit, like her mother. Sophia could make a piano sing like no one else, and her performances often left audiences in awe. She was quieter than Lucas, more introspective, but she had a magnetism about her that people couldn't ignore. Sophia was the town's rising star, with a future that seemed as bright as her brother's. For anyone looking in from the outside, the Brooks family appeared perfect. They were the embodiment of the American dream, successful, close-knit, and seemingly untouched by the struggles that plagued other families in Havenridge. But behind the perfect facade, there were whispers. Whispers about Lucas and Sophia, how close they were. Whispers that maybe, just maybe, their relationship went beyond what was normal for siblings. Most people brushed off the rumors. After all, the Brooks family wasn't the kind of family that had scandal. They were too perfect for that. As the days passed, though, people couldn't help but notice certain things. The way Lucas would protect Sophia, sometimes almost too much. Or how they always seemed to be together, even when other kids their age were off with their own friends. The Brooks parents saw their bond as something to be proud of, two siblings who loved each other and cared for one another deeply. But to those on the outside, something about it just didn't sit right. Beneath the surface of this picturesque family, there was a secret so dark it would eventually tear them apart. Lucas and Sophia had always been close, perhaps too close. What had begun as an innocent sibling bond was slowly twisting into something far more dangerous. At first, it was just a connection stronger than most brothers and sisters. But as they grew older, that connection deepened into something that couldn't be explained. They didn't talk about it, but they both felt it. It was as if they were being pulled toward each other by some invisible force, a force they both feared but couldn't resist. The signs were small at first, a lingering look, a touch that lasted just a little too long. Lucas became more protective of Sophia. He would glare at any boy who so much as looked in her direction. And Sophia, once open and friendly with everyone, began to withdraw. She became more reserved, more secretive. The siblings spent more time alone, away from their friends, away from their parents, away from prying eyes. To Lucas and Sophia, their bond felt unbreakable, like they were the only two people who truly understood each other. But deep down, they knew there was something wrong, something that couldn't be ignored forever. They knew that what they were feeling was forbidden, and yet they couldn't stop. The perfect Brooks family, with its perfect house and perfect children, was slowly starting to fracture. But no one could see it. Not yet. The town of Havenridge had no idea what was coming. Lucas and Sophia Brooks had learned how to hide their secret well. The bond between them had always been close, but as they grew older, that closeness turned into something far more complicated, something darker. Still, life in Havenridge carried on, and the Brooks siblings went about their daily routines, quietly nurturing the feelings they both knew were forbidden. Their parents, John and Marie, remained blissfully unaware. To them, Lucas and Sophia were just incredibly close siblings. John, always busy with his architecture projects, trusted Lucas to be the responsible older brother, to look out for his little sister. Marie, on the other hand, saw their bond as a testament to the strong family she had worked so hard to build, but the signs were there, if they had only looked closer. The summer of 2023 was an especially beautiful one in Havenridge. The sun seemed to hang in the sky longer, bathing the town in a golden glow that made everything feel timeless. To the outside world, it was just another peaceful summer. But for Lucas and Sophia, that summer marked the turning point, the point of no return. It started with small things. Lucas would find excuses to be alone with Sophia, late-night walks along the beach, driving out to secluded spots outside town where no one would find them. The two of them had built their own world, a place where no one else mattered. Sophia, too, had become more isolated. She stopped attending her piano recitals and avoided gatherings with friends. The only person she wanted to be around was Lucas. Lucas had always been the protective brother, but now his protectiveness bordered on obsession. He didn't like Sophia talking to other boys, even the ones she had known for years. If a classmate mentioned her name or showed interest, Lucas would quickly intervene. It was subtle at first, pulling her away from conversations, steering her away from anyone who might get too close. But as the summer went on, his behavior became more extreme. At family dinners, Lucas's eyes rarely left Sophia. If their parents noticed, they didn't say anything. After all, who would suspect anything strange about a brother looking after his sister? But the tension between them was building, and it was becoming harder to keep their emotions in check. Sophia started to feel trapped, caught between the intense connection she felt with her brother and the growing guilt that gnawed at her. She loved Lucas. She always had. But now that love felt like a weight, pulling her deeper into something she knew was wrong. And Lucas, for all his protectiveness, was becoming increasingly possessive. As the weeks passed, their secret meetings became more frequent, more desperate. They would sneak out of the house at night, driving out to the cliffs just outside of Havenridge, where the sea crashed violently against the rocks below. It was their escape, their sanctuary. But the isolation only fueled their obsession, and soon the line between love and control began to blur. One night, in late August, everything changed. Sophia had begun to pull away, sensing the dangerous path they were on. She started avoiding Lucas, retreating into her room for hours at a time, claiming she needed to focus on her art. But Lucas could see through it. He knew she was distancing herself, and he couldn't stand it. That evening, Lucas found her sitting alone on the porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun was setting into the sea. Without a word, he sat down beside her. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. For a moment, they just sat there in silence, the only sound the distant crash of waves against the shore. Finally, Sophia broke the silence. "I can't do this anymore, Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's not right." Her words hung in the air like a warning. But Lucas didn't respond right away. He couldn't. The thought of losing her, of her pulling away for good, was unbearable. He turned to her, his face tight with emotion, and reached for her hand. Sophia flinched, but didn't pull away. "We're not like them," Lucas said quietly, his voice trembling. "We don't have to be like everyone else. What we have, it's different." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She wanted to believe him, part of her always had, but deep down she knew there was no future in what they were doing. No matter how much she loved her brother, this wasn't something they could continue. She tried to explain, to make him understand, but the more she spoke, the more distant Lucas became. That night, for the first time, Sophia realized just how deep Lucas's obsession ran. She had always thought of him as her protector, her confidant. But now, sitting beside him on the porch, she could see the darkness in his eyes. He wasn't just her brother anymore. He was something else, someone who couldn't let go. And in that moment, Sophia knew that whatever this was between them, it would only end in tragedy. As the summer faded into autumn, Lucas and Sophia's once secret world began to crumble. What had started as an emotional bond now twisted into something darker, something dangerous. The tension between them was palpable, and each day it grew harder to hide the truth from themselves, let alone from those around them. Sophia, desperate to regain some sense of normalcy, began distancing herself further. She reconnected with old friends, throwing herself into her art, trying to escape the gravitational pull that Lucas seemed to have over her. She needed space, time to breathe. But Lucas wouldn't allow it. Lucas had become consumed. Sophia's attempts to pull away only fueled his obsession, and with each passing day, his need to keep her close grew more intense. He started showing up at her school, waiting outside her classes. He would drive by her friends' houses, checking on her, making sure she wasn't with anyone else. To him, Sophia wasn't just his sister. She was his, and the idea of losing her filled him with a rage he couldn't control. It wasn't long before people started to notice. Sophia's friends asked questions. Why was Lucas always around? Why did he seem to be following her everywhere? At first, Sophia brushed it off, telling them Lucas was just being protective, like any brother would be. But she knew that wasn't the truth. She knew it was something more. Her parents, too, began to sense the growing strain between their children. John and Evelyn Brooks had always seen Lucas and Sophia as close, but recently, something felt off. They'd catch Lucas watching Sophia with an intensity that didn't seem normal, and Sophia, once so bright and full of life, seemed withdrawn, always on edge. But John and Evelyn, wrapped up in their own lives, chose to dismiss the signs. After all, they were a picture-perfect family. What could possibly be wrong? Sophia felt suffocated. The love she once felt for her brother had turned into fear. She no longer recognized the person Lucas had become. His once protective nature had transformed into something possessive, something dangerous, and the more she tried to pull away, the tighter his grip became. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a cool evening in October, the kind where the air carried the scent of falling leaves and the wind whispered promises of the colder months ahead. Sophia had agreed to meet a boy from school, Nathan, for a study session at the local library. She needed an escape, a way to remind herself that she could still be normal, that she could still live a life outside the shadow of her brother. But Lucas had other plans. Unbeknownst to Sophia, Lucas had been following her that day, watching her from the distance as she made her way to the library. His heart raced with anger, his mind clouded with jealousy. Who was this boy, Nathan? What did he want with Sophia, and why hadn't she told him about it? Inside the library, Sophia and Nathan sat together at one of the long wooden tables, their books and papers spread out before them. For the first time in weeks, Sophia felt a sense of calm. Nathan was kind, funny in a quiet sort of way, and being with him was a relief. He didn't know the burden she carried, the secret that hung over her life like a storm cloud. Here she could pretend, just for a little while, that everything was normal. But outside, Lucas paced. His hands clenched into fists, his mind racing. He could see them through the large windows, Sophia and Nathan sitting too close together, smiling, laughing. It felt like a betrayal. Lucas had convinced himself that Sophia was pulling away because of him, because she didn't understand how much he loved her. But now, seeing her with someone else, he realized it wasn't just that. She was leaving him for someone else. His worst fear was coming true. Lucas couldn't let that happen. Without thinking, he pushed open the library door, the bell above it jingling softly as he stepped inside. Sophia didn't notice him at first, too engrossed in the conversation with Nathan, but when she looked up, her heart stopped. There he was, her brother, standing just inside the doorway, his eyes fixed on her like a predator locked onto its prey. Nathan, oblivious to the tension, glanced between the two siblings, offering Lucas a friendly wave. "Hey, Lucas, you need something?" But Lucas didn't answer. His eyes never left Sophia. He could see the fear in her expression, the way her body tensed at the sight of him, and it only fueled his anger. In his mind, Nathan was the enemy, the one who was taking Sophia away from him. And Sophia, she had let it happen. The tension in the air was suffocating, and Sophia could feel it tightening around her like a noose. She stood up slowly, trying to remain calm. "Lucas, it's not what you think." But it was too late. In Lucas's mind, it didn't matter what she said. He had already decided what this was. This was betrayal. This was the moment she chose someone else over him. The rest of the library seemed to disappear. All that remained were Lucas, Sophia, and the rage that threatened to consume them both. Nathan, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stood up as well, his confusion quickly turning to concern. "Hey, man, let's just talk." But Lucas didn't want to talk, and in that moment, the cracks in their world finally shattered. What happened next would change everything. The tension, the obsession, the lies, all of it collided in that single, horrifying moment. The moment where Lucas's fragile sense of control shattered. As Nathan stood, trying to de-escalate the situation, Lucas's anger exploded. His mind, twisted by jealousy and the consuming desire to possess what he believed was his, could no longer see reason. All he saw was a threat to the one person he couldn't bear to lose, and in that moment, the line between love and hatred blurred. With a sudden and terrifying intensity, Lucas lunged at Nathan, his hands grabbing the front of Nathan's shirt, shoving him back against the table. The sound of books and papers scattering echoed through the quiet library as Sophia screamed, rushing forward in a desperate attempt to stop her brother. "Lucas, stop!" she shouted, her voice trembling with fear. But Lucas wasn't listening. Nathan, caught off guard, stumbled, but managed to push back, trying to defend himself. "What the hell is wrong with you, man?" he shouted, but it only seemed to fuel Lucas's rage. Sophia, frozen in terror, watched as her brother, the person she had grown up with, the person she once trusted more than anyone else, was now consumed by something unrecognizable. His eyes were wild, filled with a dark rage that she had never seen before. It was as if he had become a stranger, a monster, driven by jealousy and obsession. As the struggle between Lucas and Nathan intensified, Sophia knew she had to act. She couldn't let this spiral out of control. But as she tried to intervene, pushing herself between the two, Lucas turned on her. His hands, which had once been tender and protective, now gripped her shoulders with a terrifying force. "You're mine, Sophia!" Lucas shouted, his voice shaking with a mixture of desperation and fury. "You can't leave me! You're all I have!" The weight of his words hit Sophia like a punch to the chest. For years, she had convinced herself that their relationship was something she could control, something that could be hidden away and managed. But now, standing in the middle of that library, she realized the full extent of her mistake. Lucas wasn't just in love with her, he was consumed by her, and it was destroying him. Nathan, now on his feet and shaken, tried once more to pull Lucas away, but the damage was done. With a final shove, Lucas threw Nathan into the bookshelf behind them, the impact sending a cascade of books crashing to the floor. Nathan crumpled, clutching his side, gasping for breath. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. the sight of it shocking Sophia into action. For Sophia, this was the breaking point. She had to stop this. She couldn't let Lucas hurt anyone else, couldn't let him ruin any more lives, including his own. With tears streaming down her face, she looked at her brother, pleading with him. "Lucas, please. This isn't you. You're better than this. Please stop." But Lucas wasn't listening. He was too far gone, lost in the whirlwind of his own emotions. His chest heaved with anger, his fists still clenched as he stared at Nathan, as if daring him to move. And then, in an instant, everything shifted. The sound of sirens pierced the air, faint but growing louder, as someone, perhaps a librarian or a passerby, had called the police. For the first time, Lucas's expression changed. The realization of what he had done, of how far he had fallen, began to sink in. His hands trembled, and the anger that had consumed him just moments ago began to drain away, replaced by something far darker: fear. Sophia, sensing the change in her brother, took a step closer. "Lucas, we can fix this. You just have to stop. We'll get help. We can—" But Lucas shook his head, his eyes wide and wild. "It's too late," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's too late for me." And in that moment, the weight of everything, the lies, the secrets, the betrayal, crashed down on him. The police arrived minutes later, bursting into the library, their voices loud and commanding. But Lucas didn't resist. He didn't move. He stood there, numb, as the officers rushed toward him, pulling him away from Sophia and Nathan, placing him in handcuffs. As they led him away, Sophia collapsed onto the floor, her body shaking with sobs. The life she had tried so hard to keep together had unraveled in the most violent and tragic way. The secret that she and Lucas had kept for so long had finally destroyed everything. The nightmare wasn't over, it was just beginning. Lucas was taken into custody, and Nathan was rushed to the hospital with minor injuries. But for Sophia, the emotional wounds were far deeper. Her world had collapsed in a matter of minutes, and there was no way to undo what had been done. As the police sirens faded into the distance, Sophia sat alone in the now empty library, surrounded by the shattered pieces of her life, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. After that fateful night, everything changed for the Carter family. The once perfect image of their family had been shattered, and the small town of Cedar Ridge was left reeling. Lucas's arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful journey through the justice system, but it was just the start of the unraveling truth that would devastate everyone involved. The morning after the incident, Sophia found herself in a police interrogation room, pale and exhausted, her mind barely able to process the events of the previous day. Her heart still ached from the shock of seeing Lucas taken away in handcuffs, but there was no escaping the reality now. She knew that the secrets they had kept for so long were about to come to light. The investigators wanted answers. What had driven Lucas to such violence? Why had there been such tension between him and Nathan, and why had Sophia been in the middle of it all? At first, Sophia tried to protect her brother, to shield him from the full weight of the truth, but as the questions became more pointed, the details that she had worked so hard to bury began to surface. It wasn't long before the investigators uncovered the truth that had been lurking in the shadows for years, the truth about the forbidden relationship between Lucas and Sophia. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The town of Cedar Ridge, once known for its tranquility, was now engulfed in scandal. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. How had such a terrible secret stayed hidden for so long? How could a bond that had once seemed so innocent twist into something so dark and destructive? As the details emerged, the town found itself divided. Some sympathized with Sophia, seeing her as a victim of a situation she couldn't control, while others saw her as complicit, wondering how she could have let things spiral so far out of control. Lucas was charged with aggravated assault and faced a trial that would captivate not only Cedar Ridge, but the wider region as well. His defense attorneys argued that his mental state had been severely affected by his overwhelming emotional attachment to Sophia, painting a picture of a young man who had been consumed by love and jealousy to the point of madness. They insisted that his actions were driven by desperation and a loss of control, not malice, but the prosecution was unforgiving. They painted Lucas as a dangerous young man whose obsession had turned into violence, a man who had willingly crossed every line to get what he wanted, regardless of the consequences. The courtroom became a battleground, with every detail of Lucas and Sophia's forbidden relationship laid bare for the world to see. As the trial wore on, the once private details of their lives became public spectacle. Sophia, who had tried to keep her emotions in check, found herself breaking down on the witness stand as she recounted the events leading up to that night. She told the court how Lucas had become increasingly possessive, how his love had grown darker and more suffocating. She admitted to feeling trapped, torn between the bond she shared with her brother and the knowledge that their relationship was wrong. Lucas, too, took the stand, his face pale and drawn, his voice trembling as he tried to explain the depths of his feelings for Sophia. He spoke of the guilt that had plagued him, the confusion and anger that had eaten away at him for years. He admitted that his jealousy had overwhelmed him that night in the library, but insisted that he had never meant to hurt anyone, not Nathan, and certainly not Sophia. In the end, the jury reached its verdict. Lucas was found guilty of aggravated assault and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 7. The sentence brought some closure to the legal proceedings, but for those involved, the emotional wounds were far from healed. Sophia was left to pick up the pieces of her life, burdened by the knowledge that she had played a role in the destruction of her family. Nathan, though he recovered physically from the altercation, would never fully forget the night that had changed everything. The town of Cedar Ridge, once peaceful and serene, would forever be marked by the tragedy that had unfolded within its borders. Lucas's imprisonment became a somber chapter in the Carter family's story. In prison, he struggled with his emotions, plagued by the weight of his actions. He tried to make sense of what he had done, but the realization that he had hurt the very people he loved most haunted him. The letters he wrote to Sophia from his prison cell went unanswered, a stark reminder of the chasm that had formed between them. Years later, the town would still talk about the Carter family, about Lucas and Sophia and the love that had spiraled out of control. But as the years passed, the story would become less about the sensational details and more about the lessons learned. Cedar Ridge had learned that even the quietest towns, even the closest families, can harbor secrets that, when left unchecked, can unravel everything. For Sophia, the road to healing would be long. She would have to face the consequences of the choices she had made and find a way to live with the memories of a time when her love for her brother had blurred the line between right and wrong, and for Lucas, behind bars, the echoes of that night in the library would never fully fade.